Okay, so thank you for having me today. I love talking about gardening. I could talk about gardening all the time. So I really appreciate the chance to get up here and share what we're doing with you guys. I'm sure you guys probably know a lot more about gardening than I do. We started gardening about 15 years ago when my oldest daughter was ready to start eating solid foods, and I wanted to make all our own baby food. And I started learning about food, and I started learning about organics, and about how important it was to have clean food. And so we started gardening because organic food is expensive. And I had no background in gardening at all. I like to cut my grass, and that was about it. So I went to the library and I checked out this book and just learned how to garden from reading the book. And so I just want to encourage, our mission right now with Plum Fabulous Foods is we want to encourage other families to garden. You're always going to have to eat. There's trends that come and go and things that are popular and unpopular, but you're always going to have to eat. And you know, God started with a garden, and I just feel like you really connect with nature when you're out there, and it's just so good for you. I had no idea. I had read that gardening was good exercise, and I remember thinking, like, how hard could it be to poke some seeds in the ground? Like, what is that? How is that an exercise? But let me tell you, it is an excellent exercise. It's the only exercise I get now. And it's been really wonderful for our children to grow up gardening. And so we lived here in town. We started with 2 little raised beds. They were 4 by 8 feet. And we enjoyed that experience so much that we decided to move to Plum so that we could do the chickens and we could have a bigger garden and we could really provide more of our own food. And so we bought 2 acres out of Plum, and we have been gardening ever since. And learning as we go. And so we developed what we like to call organic gardening for busy people. I know a lot of people, especially young families, they have every excuse in the book for not wanting to garden. They're too busy, they don't have good soil, and they don't know what to do. And those are some pretty big obstacles to get over. So I thought if we could take what we've learned over the last 15 years and break it down into 10 easy steps, and it's not based on your soil, and it's something that you can do with your children, there's no reason why every family can't go out and do something small and get started. Okay? So you'll see this very first statistic on the top of your page. The average plate of food in our country travels 1,500 miles from the field to the table. Okay? Feeding the average American requires 400 gallons of oil per person per year. In 2009, only 1.2% of food was produced at home. Okay? So you ladies know all about gardening, and you know how important and how satisfying and rewarding it is to provide your own food. And we're trying to help bring that experience to as many people as possible. I'm just going to go over our top 10 basic tips for everybody. So first, obviously, is location. If you're going to have a garden, there's a couple things that are real basic. You want to have sun, you want to have water, and you want to have it close to the house, in my opinion. You don't want this way over somewhere in your property that you're not going to see it. Put it close to your house. It's beautiful. Go spend some time out there. When I lived in town, I pulled out everything that was flowering and I put in vegetables. Every bed that was already at our beautiful 1940s house, I filled with vegetables because I wanted to eat it. To this day, I'm terrible with flowers. But I can grow some vegetables because I eat them. And I have a little bit more passion about growing those. So this was our original garden when we started in Plum. We started with 4 little beds, and you can see that we did a raised bed method. And at that time, we were filling our beds with the square foot gardening Mills mix, which is 1/3 peat moss, 1/3 compost, and 1/3 vermiculite. Okay? It was super expensive. The soil is beautiful, wonderful soil, but it's very expensive. And you can see how we were doing the square foot gardening. We had the little squares mapped out and everything. One thing that we didn't have where we put our garden was water. So you can see in the second picture here, you can see there's a hose. And I had a hose laying across the back of my yard from my house to my garden for 7 years. Until this year, I told my sons this summer, I said, that's it, I'm tired of the hose. Go out there and bury that hose. And so my sons went out there with a sharpshooter and they buried the hose enough that I could go without having to move it every single time. And wouldn't you know it, 3 months later, my husband finally decided to rent a ditch digger and run water out to the garden. And so, at any rate, don't let not having water right by your garden be a deterrent either, because a hose laying across the yard worked just fine for us for 7 years. Okay? And so keep this stuff in mind. If you guys if you are a vegetable garden, but maybe you have sons or daughters or grandchildren that are interested, please take this information to pass on to them as well. So we expanded our garden. The very first year we started with our 4 beds, and then we had some 1-foot taller beds along the perimeter of the garden. And then the second year we added these 2 beds and then some more tall beds along the back. So you can see here we have our compost piles. Everything's raised beds. Our walkways here, we just took the basic native Bermuda grass that we had in our fields, and we put down newspaper, cardboard, and mulch from the county to cover that up, to try to keep the grass down from coming in our beds. And so the second year, this is what it looked like. So the next step with the soil, we were ready after that second year, we were ready to go bigger. And I do encourage people who are new families who are getting into vegetable gardening to start small. Don't start with some massive, huge garden with 50 watermelon plants growing in it. Because 1, it's going to be difficult to manage and you're going to get burned out. And 2, what in the world are you going to do with 150 watermelons when they all come in season? So I encourage people to start small and plant lots of different things that you would eat in your kitchen. So the second year we were ready to expand, we expanded our garden by the length of cattle panels, because that's what our fencing was made out of. So we had, the first garden was 4 little beds, and it didn't even have a fence, and then we got chickens, and so we fenced everything, and it was 32 by 32. 2 cattle panels by 2 cattle panels. And our plan had always been, when we wanted to expand, we would just swing out the end of that garden and add some more cattle panels and we'd be good to go. So another thing I encourage people when they're looking at implementing a new vegetable garden is plan for the future. Look and set your garden up. Spend a lot of time planning and visualizing long term. If you really enjoy doing this, do you have room to expand? Start small and manageable, but keep an eye towards the future so that you can make it bigger when you're ready to. And so we started at the back of our property, and we always knew that we could keep moving forward by these 32-foot segments 4 or 5 times before we hit the highway, and then we'd have to come up with a new plan. But who knows if we'll ever get that far. So when we did the Mel's mix, it was cost prohibitive to do that for our next big expansion, because it was probably like $700 to fill our first sets of beds with this really nice soil. A large part of that cost was the vermiculite. Vermiculite is like perlite, if you're familiar with it, and it's great. It keeps the soil moist and drillable, but it's not feasible on a large scale. It would have been so expensive. So the other thing that we've tried to look at when we're coming up with our garden philosophy is not only trying to keep it easy, but trying to keep it cheap, because a lot of young families, we were on a stable income with 4 kids, and we wanted to do something that was cheap. We don't want to grow $30 tomatoes, So we were researching different methods, and we loved the square foot gardening method, and we were speaking earlier about how this, if you're familiar with the original square foot gardening book back in the 1970s, it was a great book, and he talked lots of wonderful things about amending your soil and really working with what you have. But his new garden philosophy was working with anything. He went on this mission to develop this process that he could go anywhere in the world and they could have a garden, because you're going to go up. And we liked that, but Mel's mix on a large scale was too expensive. So then we discovered another garden philosophy called Back to Eden. Is anybody in here familiar with that method? It's a mulch-based method, and it's from this fabulous guy. I think he's in Oregon or Washington, and there's a link in your packet to his documentary on the internet. It's an hour long. I think it's life-changing. If you guys enjoy watching stuff about gardening, go check out this documentary, because it's fabulous. And he basically had this epiphany from God that the easiest way to garden is to work with Mother Nature and use a mulch-based system. And one of the reasons this works so well is because trees have these wonderful deep tap roots, and they're able to pull up all these nutrients from deep in the earth that we don't have access to in the top couple layers of topsoil. Because we don't want to just grow plants. We want to grow healthy plants that are going to feed us nutritionally. And so that's what we did with our next garden expansion. Instead of having raised beds with lumber on the sides, and there's an expense there too, and sidewalks everywhere, we just raised the whole thing. So we did our next 32 by 32 section, and we did the same thing that we were doing in our walkways in our original garden. We put down newspaper, and then cardboard, and then for this part we did a third topsoil, and you can see that's that ugly brown soil there, a third mulch, and a third compost, and we just layered it on. And so when we're talking about good soil, that's what we talk about, is using good soil like that. And then this is our current garden. Our original garden stopped right about there. Our second garden stopped here. And then earlier this year, we just did our third garden expansion. Again, another 32 by 32 feet. And this time we went even cheaper. We decided, instead of getting that nice mushroom compost from Gonzalez and buying topsoil and all that, we did straight mulch. 100% mulch from the county. And that is definitely the cheapest way to go. The only downside to using straight mulch is that we had to put it down in March or April, and we had to wait patiently 6 months for it to finish decomposing. You don't want to plant in straight mulch. And a lot of people, we like to do garden installations for people. We like to come out and help them visualize and see this on their own property, but sometimes they need help getting started, so we love to do that. And if they're trying to save money, we recommend going the mulch-based method, the 100% mulch-based method, because it's $5 a trailer load. I don't know if you guys have ever gotten a mulch from the county. It's super cheap. But a lot of people they put a garden in, they want to plant right away, and so they have a hard time waiting. But that's definitely the cheapest way to do it. And so we just planted in it 2 weeks ago, last week or 2 weeks ago. We just put our first 450 plants out there. Okay, the next thing you want to take in mind when you're setting up your vegetable garden is your walkways and perimeters. Now there's lots of gardening books, and they are so good, but a lot of them are based on gardens that are up north. And the benefit they have being up north is they get a hard freeze every year that kills the grasses. Texas is so wonderful because we can plant year-round. I harvest every week year-round. There's always something you can grow in the garden, vegetable-wise, all the time. The problem with having a year-round garden is that you have to contend with grass. And a lot of the times you're so excited to get your garden in the ground, and you're looking really short-term, like you want to get those plants growing, and you're not thinking about the long-term impact of the Bermuda grass and everything coming back. And it will come back. Bermuda grass roots 12 to 15 feet deep underground. So after the first couple of years, the honeymoon phase is over and that grass is starting to come. Even with, we put down 8 inches of mulch in our newest section of garden. That's a lot of mulch. But we know that the grass is going to come. So a couple things that we want to recommend to people who aren't thinking about that when they're putting in their brand new garden is to put a perimeter down of some sort of weed block. And it can be newspaper and cardboard mulch. It can be the weed block that you buy for like a landscaping weed block. It can be anything, but do something around the perimeter of your garden. And so when we had our fencing done, we have 2-foot walkways. We've got the 3-foot weed block. We've got 2 foot in our garden, and we have a foot that extends out past our fence so that we can weed eat and not butcher our fence. And because if you stop your weed block right at your fence, you're always going to be fighting that fence. It's going to be a difficult barrier to try to work with. It's a lot easier to have a clean edge outside of your fence to work with. So think about your perimeters, and then also, like back when we were on Central Texas Gardener, we had a beautiful garden. It was beautiful, and we were doing the mulch in the walkways, and it was really pretty to do that. The problem with that method was that we were out every single weekend weeding those walkways. We spent more time weeding walkways than we ever spent working in our vegetable beds. because the walkways were like this perfect growing environment. It was just mulch, and after 6 months, it was breaking down to make perfect soil, and so the weeds were landing on top. Wind-blown weeds were landing on top, and they were growing nonstop. And so our lives have gotten so busy now that we couldn't keep that method up. And so we moved away from doing mulch in the walkways to putting down just straight landscape material. You can use cardboard, you can use gravel, you can do something prettier than this if you wanted to, but we've moved past trying to be pretty, and we're just totally functional right now. Like, what can we manage in our very busy life with 6 children? We homeschool, so we're busy all the time. So something that you want to keep in mind, like my husband hates the black. He just hates to walk out there and see like this artificial substance in the garden. And his suggestion was, can we just put mulch over the landscape fabric? And the problem with that is that weeds need 1/4 of an inch of soil to start growing. And so you put mulch on there, it's going to break down. It's going to create a surface for weeds to grow. So the answer to that is no, you really can't. It's just going to look like this. And just so you can see some of your other options, this is what, again, we're always looking for cost-cutting methods, and so we had cardboard down for a while. This is actually some cardboard that we were able to get from Micro Machinery here in town. They're always trying to get rid of it, and we're a big fan of trying to recycle material as much as possible. Like this lady was saying that she used rock from her property when she was building her keyhole garden, and that's perfect. That's what we want. We don't want to have to go to Home Depot and Lowe's to buy everything we need. So, and then you can see here when we started implementing our walkways.
One of the problems that we have with the cardboard though is we want to be careful that the cardboard isn't going to leach chemicals into your soil.
That's
because
true.
When it got wet, it was decomposing along with the mulch. So we ended up taking it out partly because we were worried about the chemicals that might leach into the soil, which would get into the plants.
Yeah, and you have to be careful with whatever source. This cardboard we were getting from Micro Machinery was like it was almost like a pressed particle board of some sort. And so I know like when you get clean, just plain corrugated cardboard, it's going to break down, and there's really probably no other materials in there, especially if you pull the tape off. But with this stuff, because it wasn't really cardboard, it was like a pressed particle board, we weren't sure what kind of glues and other chemicals might be in it. So we did end up pulling all that stuff out and then going with our walkways. And you have good soil, you can grow all year, all the time. I water 1 time a week, all year long. We're picking 80 pounds of okra in the hottest part of the year when everybody else's gardens is dead. And that's because when you're organic, you go low and slow. You know, when you put nitrogen or some kind of chemical fertilizer on your plants, it's going to get huge and it's going to produce a lot in a short amount of time. And you're going to think, man, look at me, I'm an awesome gardener, I've got all this stuff, it's just going to blow up. But then it's going to fizzle out because it's like putting somebody on steroids and getting real beefed up and real big, and then you got to come back to reality. That's not sustainable. And so when you go organic, you have the ability to give your plants the chance to adapt to Mother Nature. As it starts getting hotter, your plants are going to adapt to that, and they're going to keep producing. It's only when you beat them up with a whole bunch of that chemical fertilizer that you're going to kill them in the long term. And the other thing about chemical fertilizers is those things will build up in your soil. And you're going to get an imbalance of your soil eventually because it's not made to have chemical inputs like that. Another thing about the chemical inputs is that it really destroys the careful balance of microlife in your soil. If you're feeding it all this nitrogen, this chemical nitrogen, the microorganisms in your soil are going to eat that, and they're going to explode in growth. But then they're going to die off too. And so not only are your plants going to have this imbalance, your soil is going to have this imbalance, and then your microorganisms in your soil are going to have this imbalance. And there is more life, more microorganisms in 1 inch of soil than there are people on the planet. Right now there's 7.5 billion people in the world. There's more life, more organisms living in 1 inch of soil than people on the planet. And that's the problem that a lot of people, I'm sure you ladies know all about this, but there's a lot of people that don't understand. It's not about what's above ground. It's about what's below ground. And that's what allows you to produce a lot in a small amount of space. Our original garden that we've harvested from so far this year is 0.04 of an acre. And that's not even including the walkways. And we've harvested 2,000 pounds of vegetables from that small area. And it's because our soil can handle that. So there's two things we like to do for our soil. One is I'm a huge fan of this Agtivate stuff. This is produced here in LaGrange, and it's a living organism. I've got it on ice packs here because you have to keep it cold because it's alive, and you have to burp it because it off-gas. I am a distributor for Agtivate because I so believe in this stuff. So if you ever come up to the square on a Saturday morning to our farmer's market booth, I've got this for sale. I've got some today for sale if you want to buy it. And not because I make any money off of it, because it's not what it's about. It's about the fact that this stuff really works. The best way to explain this stuff is it's like phytoplankton in the ocean. You know, if you don't have phytoplankton, you don't have large killer whales. This is the smallest microorganism that you can put in your soil. So if you have a lot of this, if you look back at the front page, if you have a lot of this, then you have a lot of all these other layers. And the more you have of all that, the more you have healthy soil that can support your plants. I mean, look at this worm. This was after one application of Activate. My son picked that worm out of our garden. It's amazing. And it's amazing that it's made right here in LaGrange. To me, it's really shocking. So this is the first thing. Before we started using Activate, we were only compost. Now we use compost and the Activate because they're mutually beneficial. So you're basically putting live organisms into your soil when you're putting that on your soil. I only put it out twice a year. You mix it up in a watering can or a sprayer, and you pour it on your garden. That's it, twice a year. After 2 years of using it, you don't ever have to use it again. It's in your soil. Okay, the microorganisms will reproduce themselves. It's $18 to make 20 gallons, which is enough to put on my garden, and that's a heck of a lot cheaper than fertilizer. And the thing about the Activate, I remember in the hottest part of the summer, about August, everybody's gardens were burned up, and I was picking tons of vegetables, and my soil was moist, and I was still only watering once a week. And I asked the scientist guy that works up there, I said, why is this? Because I don't understand a lot of the science. And he said it's because there's so many microorganisms in our soil that as they're respirating, one of the byproducts of that is H2O, it's water. And so just having those microorganisms in your soil is putting more moisture back in your soil. It's a beautiful thing. The other thing that you want to do to keep your vegetable garden thriving is to feed it with compost. I'm sure you ladies know all about compost. You can't just put a garden in and grow a bunch of stuff and walk away. You have to feed it. I'm a huge fan of compost. We started with a small compost operation. Oh, here's our Activate Trials. We did some side-by-side trials last year, and this was after one application. This is where we started. So you can see the two beds. This is the one that doesn't have it. This was later in the season. So they've gotten so big that they've just expanded and started growing into the walkways. The thing about this that's funny is that I didn't know that you were not supposed to use chlorinated water because chlorine kills algae. This is basically pond scum, by the way, or the algae that grows in your pool. And so chlorine kills algae, and I'm on Fayette County water, which is heavily chlorinated. I didn't know that, so this is even this effective without using non-chlorinated water. If you are on county or city water that's chlorinated, you want to get yourself a bucket of water and let it off gas for 24 hours before you use it. That's the ideal way. But even without that, our garden this year has produced 30% more than it did last year, and this has been the only change. So a 30% increase is huge. Last year we harvested 1,500 pounds, and that was a banner year to me. And this year it's been 2,000 pounds without lifting a finger to do anything different. It's just been the use of the Activate. So again, I'm a huge fan of it because I really do believe it's a beneficial input. Compost materials, if you're not familiar with compost, you can use grass clippings, mulch, kitchen scraps, manure, leaves, garden scraps, anything you pull out of the garden you can put back in there. We do feed our chickens all organic feed so that when we get their manure, we know that it's got, it doesn't have any foreign stuff in there. You want to be careful if you're using straw, that you want to get straw that's not been treated with like a Roundup or something that's going to kill your stuff. And this is where we started. You don't have to start big. You can start small. We just had some hardware cloth, and we made rings with it. And we used those for years. We would flip it one from the other, and then we would sift it when it was done. We'd grow it into a bigger compost operation now that we have a bigger garden, so we've used these pallets. You want to be careful when you use pallets to make sure you can get untreated wood if possible, because everything will leach into your soil. And keep that in mind too, if you're going to do any sort of raised bed gardens, that you be careful what you use for your edging. You do not want to use galvanized metal. I see a lot of times people will get like old cattle troughs or the galvanized siding and use that. That will leach chemicals into your soil. And that's fine if you're doing flowers, but if you're going to be eating that stuff, you want to be really careful what you use. You don't want to use treated lumber. You don't want to use railroad ties. So just be careful what you're using if you're going to use edging. And like I said, we just moved to stop. We don't even use edging anymore because that's another cost. And so just keep those things in mind. You know your compost is done when you can screen it. So we still have the screener. I still use it. It was a real simple one that we built, and we would shake it on top of a wheelbarrow. Now, my husband contributed what he calls the spider, and he got a vibrating motor, and he designed this sifter so that we could do it a little bit faster. And I think he just wanted to build something that had a motor, and it was fun. And it works great, and I'm very thankful for it. Okay, when you've got your good soil, and you've got your fence, and you've got your perimeter, and you're ready to go, you've got your compost, so you can feed your plants. The next thing you want to do is prepare your site for planting. Notice we haven't even got to planting yet, and that's what everyone wants to do. They want to put the plants in the ground, but there's so much work that you have to do first. So this is what my garden will look like. There's a couple beds I still really struggle with grass in, and this is, I tried to find the worst bed I could show you ladies. So one, I don't have time to weed anymore. I'm busy, okay? So we've gone to a no-weed garden. So we're no-till, we're no chemicals, and we're no weed. Who likes to weed? Anybody? Good. This is what it's going to look like at its worst, okay? But I don't mind that. For one, it's still producing, so it hasn't affected the production. And two, I know in the back of my head that when we get our first freeze around November 15th, that's all going to die, and I'm going to rip it all out, and it's going to get covered and look like this, and it's going to be fine, okay? So every time we are ready to plant a bed, if we have problems like this, because we have some beds that we just don't have grass that grows there. Most beds have grass that will come back. This is that annoying chickweed that's impossible to get rid of. So what we do when we're ready to plant is we put down, on top of our layer of soil, we put down newspaper, and then we want to hold that in place with either mulch or compost, okay? So that layer of newspaper is just acting as a weed block. And it's they've got the soy-based ink in them, so we know that it's safe. And it's a heck of a lot easier to do that than it is to pull weeds. So every time, twice a year in our spring and fall planting, when we're ready to put a new bed in, that's what we'll do. That takes care of our weeding for the whole 6 months. Almost all newspapers nowadays have gone to soy-based ink, and so you're pretty safe anywhere that you source. That's a lot of contention about that in the organic world. Newspaper is an acceptable. We're not a certified organic garden because I don't know if y'all ever looked into that process, but it's ridiculously expensive. But we follow all the same protocols, even though we don't have the $5,000 stamp. And so any kind of newspaper for a weed prevention is acceptable to the OMRI standards. Okay, so you can see here we've got a bunch of grass coming up in the middle. And this is back before I had the walkways. This is back when we were still doing mulch walkways. But the same thing here. I put down newspaper and I put down mulch on top of it, and you keep planting and you're good to go. Okay, finally, we get to start planting. This is the exciting part. We've done all this planting. I do want to back up real quick. When you're starting a new spot, a new vegetable garden, if, let's say you don't have one existing and you want to put one somewhere, don't worry about where you put it if there's grass already there. Okay, I don't know if you guys saw in where we did our garden expansion, it was just our grass hayfield. We had a hayfield that somebody moved a 100-year-old house into, and so that's That's our 2-acre property. When we're getting ready to do a garden expansion, all we do is lay down newspaper, cardboard, and mulch. That's it. That's our garden. We let it sit till it's ready to plant. And then if any weeds have come up, we'll do another layer of newspaper and some mulch on top of that, and it's just to hold down that newspaper. Does anybody have any questions about that? It's not exactly a lasagna gardening, but that's as easy. We don't till it. We don't do anything. We just straight on the Bermuda grass. We'll mow it down. We can remember newspaper, cardboard, mulch. That's it. But there's one trick about doing that I did learn that I want to stress. If you use that method, get your newspaper wet when you put it down there. If you just do cardboard on top of the grass, which is what we used to do, that leaves air pockets. And Bermuda grass, that's its little heart, it will live through anything until like the next ice age, and it will live underneath that cardboard until it decomposes, and then it will come right back up. If you do newspaper and you get it wet, that newspaper will adhere to the ground, and you won't have those air pockets. Then you put your cardboard on top of that, and then you put your big layer of mulch or topsoil or compost or whatever you want to use. So just keep that in mind. Okay, we like to start as many seeds as we can because we get to pick fun varieties, like a lot of heirloom crops. We like to try new things every year. We like to try new vegetables like celery or artichokes or some of these other things that are hard to find in the grocery store, because that's one of the benefits to having a home vegetable garden, is you get to find stuff that you don't have access to in the grocery store. So this is some Indian corn that we did this year. I mean, look at this beautiful purple husk on this corn. And then we did these Brad's Atomic cherry tomatoes. Is anybody familiar with the Seed Savers? Rareseeds.com. This is the 2018 Heirloom Best of Show winner. Were these little purplish, greenish, strange-looking tomatoes. We've got purple cauliflower that we had. We like to start as many seeds as we can inside. We just get a seed tray. We put usually some screen compost from our bins in it, and then plant our seeds. And then we just have some shop lights that we've gotten from Sutherland's, and we move them up to try to keep them close to the plants. But that's it. That's all we do to start our seeds inside. Some people think seed starting is rocket science. It's really not. I thought it was for a long time until I just finally did it, and I realized how easy it was, and I realized how much money it could save me. And so we do like to start our own seeds. Another thing I'm a big proponent of is dense planting. So when the recommended planting distance is 12 inches, I do it 8 inches. We do our tomato plants 1 foot apart. We have dense planting. These Swiss chard here are 2 years old. We've kept them going all through the summertime. Swiss chard, don't ever pull your Swiss chard because it will keep going and going. It's on its 3rd year right now, the ones that I have. And again, healthy soil, it's just going to keep going. So again, with our dense plantings, one of the benefits of having your nice 3-foot walkways between your beds is that as your plants get big, they just need that real estate of the really good soil for their root system. The rest of the plant can go wherever it needs to go. So sometimes our garden's a total jungle. It's hard to walk through there because the plants are all over the place. But you can see these potato plants are growing here. We harvested 9 pounds of potatoes per square foot this year. And that was with that Activate. And that's huge. And I keep really good records because I want to see what's working and what's not working. And that's a huge increase for us. So here's a great example of what I mean about dense planting. We just put this bed in April. And so we've got bush beans coming up here. We've got some watermelon seeds that we planted that by now the watermelon vines are a good 20 feet from where they ever started here. And again, I put my watermelon vines right on the edge because all they need is that real estate to have their roots in. And they can go wherever they want. They don't need a whole bed. They just need an edge to put their roots in. We've got onions growing here because I know they're going to come out May 1st. Then we've got some eggplant growing there because I know by the time I harvest my onions, those eggplants are going to come up. And so I like to think of it like a rainforest where you're using every different layer of the tree canopy, and it's like that here. If you're familiar with the heights of your plants, you can put a lot in a small space and take advantage of those different heights. The next thing we like to encourage people is to think about your hardware. So we do use hoop houses. This is wetting tool. We ordered it off the internet. It's $1 a square foot to come in the 108-inch width. And we do that, that's our barrier method to keep pests off. And this is the only thing that we're going to do for pests. You can do other things for pests, and we'll talk about that at a later section, but this is what we like. Then this also works good in the wintertime because our garden's so small, it's really easy to go out there and put sheets or plastic over our beds. And this is what we use to support them. And I've tried lots of different things to hold the clamps to hold these things down. You can see these are some binder clips. Those don't last long term. This is some PVC pipe that's the same width as my pipes. And if you just cut out a 1/3 section of that, you can use that as a clamp. They're really great if you can buy them on the internet. The homemade ones work. They're not as good. The other thing you want to think about as hardware is your trellises. We recommend you go up every chance you get. We've tried all kinds of different trellises throughout the year. This is for our cantaloupe and our tomato. I'm a huge fan of the cattle panels because they lay flat when they're not in use, and they're sturdy. I don't like tomato cages anymore. They just got to be too much of a hassle. So you can see we've got cantaloupe growing on those. We've got our tomatoes growing on those. You just have to go out there and weave them through as they're growing. My son grew cucumbers on those cattle panel trellises this year. And that worked out really well. And again, what's great about having this trellis right here is that we've got strawberries growing here, we've got potatoes growing here, and he only needed 6 inches on either side of that trellis to grow his cucumbers. So it's all about, we call it real estate. It's all about that real estate in the garden. A couple things we like to do to help, again, our soil and our plants to be as healthy as possible because we want to benefit the nutrients from these plants. We do use fish emulsion on baby plants. That's just a clean source of straight nitrogen when they're really little. Seaweed is good. Azomite is a rock substance that is from a quarry in Utah. It's from a volcanic deposit there, and it's got over 50 different kinds of minerals in it that your body needs, and it's a natural form of it. So you can see here that we're sprinkling azomite in our rows before we plant. And then another source of that you can get here in Texas is called green sand. And again, that's just, it's a collection of nutrients, and it comes from natural deposits around Texas. There's 2 natural deposits I think here in Texas where you can get green sand. They harvest it and bag it, and you can put it on your soil, and it's a great source of nutrients. If you have problems with pests, we recommend the barrier method like the wetting tool, diatomaceous earth, BT, especially this time of year with the cabbage loopers. BT is great. It's many different forms that you can put it on your plants. Kaolin clay. If you've ever had trouble with squash bugs, squash vine borers, sometimes people use a spray kaolin clay on like their fruit trees. But Doug at Hosting and Hill introduced me to a product called Surround that you can get. It's a powdered form, and you mix it up with water, and you can actually spray that on your squash plants to keep the squash bugs away. It works great. It would come off when it rained, and so I just gave up because, again, I'm busy. And so if the squash plants didn't make it, they just get replanted, and their spot goes to something else. And then Summit is a mineral oil-based product that you can use as well. They like to all come out there and see what we're doing. The last thing I want to recommend in your gardening journey, and I'm sure you guys know all about this, is keeping a journal. And so you can see in your paperwork here, there's a couple things I've added on as an addendum. One is a sheet with heirloom varieties that do well in our area. The 2 is a schematic for a drip irrigation system if you're interested in doing a drip irrigation system. And 3 is, and this is a terrible copy, and I apologize because I write in pencil in my garden journal, but this is our master calendar that we've come up with. And so one of the topics that I was asked to talk about today was your fall gardening. And so hopefully you can see most of the fall garden calendar there, but you're able to start your seeds back in August 1st. It's on the very back of your paper. Does anybody need a handout? You need one?
It's for the back page.
Yeah, it's on the very back page. It's got the garden calendar there. Some of them are
Yes.
sorry. Okay, so we start our first set of fall seeds back August 1st. And like most gardeners, we like to push the date earlier and earlier as much as we can. And so we like to keep those inside for 6 to 8 weeks and look for that first kind of cool day that we can get stuff outside. The great thing about fall gardening is that you can start anything between now and like February, you can put in the ground at any time. You can put transplants in the ground, or you can put seeds in the ground anytime. It's not like the summertime where you have these small windows where you got to get it going before it gets shocked by the heat. The wintertime, the fall garden is the best time of year to garden. I don't water it all in the fall. I will water my transplants when I first put them out there, but I have probably half of my brand new garden. I don't have any watering system out there. I haven't put any drip irrigation system out there yet. I'm not going to do that till the spring because I know that in the fall I don't even need it. And we're saving our funds for that project. And so I have half my garden that I did straight from seeds, and it will get no water. I'll let God water it for me. I will water transplants when I put them in the ground because I do want to give them a chance to live, because I've been growing them for 8 weeks inside and keeping my kids and cats away from them. I want to see them succeed. So the things that make great transplants, anything in the brassica family, your broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, lettuces, Swiss chard, kale, and then the things that you want to start from seeds are any of your root crops, your beets, carrots, turnips, and then again, anything that you do for transplants, it's really easy to do from seeds as well. Go out there and throw your seeds out. We're big into broadcast seeding, because when you have really good soil, that stuff will push each other out of the way and grow as it needs to. It's also really, really easy when you have good soil. It's super easy to transplant stuff. I move stuff in the middle of its growing cycle all the time. I had a bed that was full of lettuces last year, and I moved the whole bed, and it was like March. It was already getting hot, and I moved the whole bed to something else, and those plants grew for another month. It was shocking. So good soil. I can't talk enough about the benefits of having good soil. Okay, do y'all have any questions? Yes, ma'am. We do have grasshoppers. Well, for one thing, the barrier method, having that wetting tool over plants is helpful. They will chew through that, though, I have discovered. The other thing that works really well, we have our chicken run. Goes around the perimeter of our garden. So chickens are good. We've cheated that way. And we also have 4 boys that love to catch grasshoppers. They go out there all the time. Same, yeah. The fire ants. The only reason we were ever on Central Texas Gardener was because when we made our first garden, I created the world's most perfect fire ant bed. It was raised loose soil with a source of water and food. It was terrible. We had the worst fire ants. And so there was like a 2-year period. I wouldn't even let my kids in the garden because it was dangerous. Because if you went out there and stood still for more than 5 seconds, you were covered in them. When I wanted to harvest potatoes, I had pants tucked into my rubber boots, and I would go out there and I would shovel, and I would run out, and I would empty all the ants off me. They were terrible. And so I had sent Central Texas Gardener a question, and I asked them, how do I take care of fire ants on a massive scale, because they're in my entire garden, everywhere. And they gave me some recommendations, and it sounded expensive, and it sounded time-consuming. And so I basically said, well, forget it. I'm going to live with them, because at least they're aerating my soil. Because they weren't mounding. They were the kind that lived underground. Every once in a while, they would mound, like on a strawberry bush, and I'd want my strawberries. So the best way to handle fire ants is orange oil, or the agricultural orange oil, not your $40 doTERRA bottle of fancy orange oil. But go to LaGrange Farm and Ranch and spend $15 on a bottle of orange oil. It will break down their exoskeletons on contact. So we would use a gallon of boiling water, an ounce of orange oil, and an ounce of Dawn dish soap, which is to help it adhere to the fire ants, and that would kill them instantly. But that was impossible to do on a mass scale, so we just ignored them. And then a couple years later, we were like, I don't see any fire ants anymore. We're not, in fact, the kids are so used to not having fire ants now. We've got the crazy sugar ants out there. But when we go someplace and they have ants crawling on them, they don't think about it anymore because they're not used to having fire ants. And so they get bit because they forget that you're supposed to wipe those suckers off. So when you have healthy soil,
your plants thrive and the pests equalize. And the grass burrs will probably go away. And I'm telling you, I mean, it's just the way God intended it to be, with healthy soil.
If y'all end up having any more questions, we do have a website you can visit. You can get it on the website, you can find it on YouTube. You can always come ask questions at the farmer's market.
Yeah, I can talk about gardening all day.
Or if you want to rewatch or review the session, then it'll be on YouTube and you can find it at our website. Very simple, it's plumfiberousfoods.com.
Yeah. Wonderful. Very good.
Thank you very much.